Welcome to this edition of Soul of Warren County. I'm your host, Mickey Gwynn. As many of you know, I'm also the museum director for the Black History Museum of Warren County. And we're very excited. In February, we're going to be hosting an exhibit. This exhibit will be at the Magnus Public Library. The opening ceremony will be on the 1st of February, and the exhibit will be displayed through the entire month. The exhibit will chronicle the history of the Rosenwald School program in Tennessee. The Tennessee State Museum has been chronicling this program for the last couple of years, and we're going to have a special display on Bernard School. Bernard School was the original structure, was a Rosenwald school. And here to talk to us about the Rosenwald School program, the Tennessee State Museum, and their roles at the museum are on my far left, Debbie Shaw, who is the Senior Curator for Archaeology, and on my near left is Tranae Chatman, who is a Curator for Social History. Ladies, welcome to Soul of Warren County.
Thank you for having us.
Before we get started, I just want to say thank you. The Tennessee State Museum has been so supportive of the Black History Museum. I think, Debbie, you and your husband were one of the first visitors we had in the museum way back, I guess, like 2021.
We've been super fans.
Well, we appreciate that. But y'all have been very supportive. Y'all have given us a lot of advice and insight on how to manage a museum because, as you know, none of us have done that kind of thing before. So thank you so much for doing that for us, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Now, let's get and talk about y'all a little bit. We'll start with Debbie. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at the museum, and we'll go from there.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm the Senior Curator of Archaeology. I've been with the museum about 13 years. Like Tranae, I work in different exhibits, so when you think archaeology, you don't automatically think Rosenwald schools, but we do go into different projects. And I also handle the field services division at the museum. So as Mickey said, one of the cool jobs I have is traveling around the state, getting to work with people setting up museums or having museums that just need a little bit of help. So.
And where are you originally from?
Vermont.
Vermont.
My dad was Navy, so we kind of lived a little bit of everywhere, and we happened to be in Millington when he retired. So I was in West Tennessee and eventually made my way to Middle Tennessee.
Was there a history of interest in museums and things of that nature, or archaeology? How did that sort of come together?
That is a good question. History has always been there, but I didn't really consider it a career. At University of Memphis, which is where I went for both my undergrad and graduate school, the archaeology and museum stuff kind of worked together, and I assumed that was like a natural pairing. They actually have a museum program now, but back then we just worked out of a lot of museums. I worked at Chickalisa when I was in graduate school, and so I think in my head I always assumed I'd eventually get into museums, and during the recession is actually when I switched over from archaeology into working mainly in the museum.
Okay. Tranae?
My name is Tranae Chatman. I am the Curator of Social History at the Tennessee State Museum. I've been there for almost 3 years now. This is actually my first museum job, so my path is a little bit different than most people in this profession. So I went to MTSU. My undergraduate degree is in history, but my master's is in business. So I really followed my passion in this career, and I'm just so happy that TSM saw my passion and allowed me to, come on and gain experience in museums. I've learned so much in 3 years. So a little bit about what I do at the museum. Like Debbie said, I work with exhibits, of course, and also behind the scenes with the artifacts, cataloging, acquisitions, donations, things of that nature. And of course, things like this, where I get to go out and talk to people.
And where are you originally from?
I am a Nashville native.
You're Nashville, okay,
yes.
From Nashville.
Okay. Yes.
So not Vermont.
Not Vermont.
Not Vermont.
Very deep roots in Middle Tennessee. My family's from north of Nashville, Robertson County, and also Wilson County.
Oh, okay. And you mentioned about working with the displays and things of that nature. I guess the general public doesn't have a good grasp of how much work goes in. I mean, you walk into a museum, you look at the displays, and everything is perfect. There's a lot of work that goes into that. Yes. I mean, I guess even starting with the research to make sure that the narratives that are there are indeed correct.
Exactly.
Historically correct and things of that nature. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, sort of the process of maybe going from concept of what you would like to do to actually having those displays out there?
Yes, so it can be a very long process to go from research to the actual displays that people see in the museum. So, for example, with the Rosenwald schools, when I started, they were just now starting to research and really put the content together for that exhibit, but they had been having discussions for
At least 6 or 8 months before that,
okay.
trying to
Yes.
figure out what the best way, to present those stories, because there were 354 Rosenwald schools in the state. How do you tell all of their stories in a 4,000 square foot
Exactly.
space?
Yeah.
So you have to go through many months of getting admin approval, and it takes a lot of passion. I think you have to be very passionate about the content sometimes to get it through, but it happens. And then after that, it's research, it's going out and talking to community members, it's looking at primary resources, scholars, things like that. And then after that is choosing artifacts. And then with that, it could be condition issues. You could have artifacts that need to be conserved in some way or another before you put them on display. It's the design, and then, choosing colors, choosing font, being cognizant of like ADA and things like that, making sure the font is big enough and it's placed high enough, the lighting is good. There's a lot of things to consider, and I don't want to ramble. And
No.
Debbie has way more
That's
experience.
not,
No, that's
that's not
perfect.
a
That's-
problem.
Yeah.
That's it.
I just, it's just interesting how you have to go through all that. I mean, it's just not as simple as just putting some things out there and saying,
Yeah.
hey, this is from a Rosenwald school or things of that nature.
Right.
I know a lot goes into that. So y'all try to come up with like a consensus at some point, I gather. But I'm sure there's probably, well, I would rather do it this way or maybe that way. But you have to come up to a consensus at some point, I'm sure.
In that beginning
Yeah.
part is where we try to work through a lot of that, so that by the
Right.
time we get into the research, like you might tweak things a little bit, but you've got a better handle on what it's going to be. But then again, with some of the communities we worked with, based on what we heard from them, it completely changed, some of the sections that we were doing. So you still leave room open, but I think by the time you start doing it, you're a little more solid.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know when y'all told us about the Rosenwald exhibit at the museum, I'm like, well, where's Bernard's school at? It's not in, and I know you can't do every school, and of course Bernard, the building no longer exists, so I can understand that. I want to talk a little bit about the Rosenwald program. I must be honest, I did not know about the Rosenwald school program until I moved back and was working with the museum, which is sort of sad to say, because I mean, that's part of history, especially African American history, back when we were sort of not guaranteed education and things of that nature.
Exactly.
Talk a little about the program, sort of where it derived from and things of that nature, and maybe even why maybe a lot of people don't know about it.
Yeah. So to your point, as you were saying, in 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court hands down Plessy versus Ferguson, which says that public accommodations can be separate
Right.
in the U.S. as long as they are equal. And
right.
we know that equal was not the case. So at the turn of the century, here comes a guy. His name is Julius Rosenwald. He is born in Chicago. And he is a rising entrepreneur. He becomes the president of Sears Roebuck right at the turn of the century. And he does that by just being just like a leader in the entrepreneurial and cataloging and merchandising. He's just like very good at that. So he takes the business to the next level and kind of makes Sears what we know it to be now, essentially. So he also has a side of himself that is very philanthropic, and he gives a lot of his money to different organizations. And he establishes a relationship with Booker T. Washington from Tuskegee Institute, the founder and president of Tuskegee Institute. So Booker T. Washington says, hey, I want to make elementary schools or like secondary schools for kids in rural Southern Black communities. It was very specific. It has to be Southern, it has to be rural, and it has to be Black for the grant itself. So ends up forming a matching fund, which is originally based out of Tuskegee Institute, where communities could write in and apply for this grant, and provide matching funds, and then they could construct their own school. So that's kind of how the program started. And in Tennessee, we had around 350. Across the South, there was about 5,000. So it was there's a
big
lot of
program,
schools.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But here in Tennessee, we had about 350 of those.
It's actually the first example of a three-way matching fund. So you've got the community that's giving in money,
Right.
you've got the local government, and then you've got like the county government that's kind of working in to make sure that there's buy-in from everybody when
Right.
they're doing that. And that was one of the really important parts as well to why that worked so well.
Yes.
Because the community is already, kind of being double taxed on some of those situations. So for them to have to front all of the money without buy-in from the community, it just kind of helps secure
Great.
a lot of
Yeah,
those schools.
That's a great point.
Yeah, as I was reading about that history, it sort of made me think a little bit about the Habitat for Humanity program. In fact, if you're going to be a beneficiary of that program, you have to put in labor. You have to be there to help build and do whatever you can as part of that program. Because at first I thought it was, they just gave you X amount of money, you wouldn't build a school. And then I found out later on after y'all's display and doing a little bit of research that the local citizens, and the story of Bernard, is an example of that. Local citizens gave money, gave time, gave labor to help build a school. The city came on board with funding, and matter of fact, I think they came on board with the site of where Bernard School is now. They donated that land to have the school built there. So I guess it gives you a little bit more buy-in if the local citizens are doing it and involved too. But from what I understand, it wasn't just schools. There were other buildings like teachers kind of.
In Tennessee, there were like 9 teacher houses that were built because sometimes the teachers were in the community, sometimes they came from up north, but again, a lot of the times they were from within the state.
Right.
Sometimes teachers just lived within the community, so you might host them for a little while, I might host them for a little while, but in Tennessee there were 9 that were actually built. The most recent Rosenwald structure that was torn down in Tennessee was actually a teacher house in Millington, where I had mentioned that I went to high school in and everything. So there's still a few out there. There just weren't as many. And then there were 10 workshops in Tennessee that were like different, like learning different type of skill workshops.
Okay, and how many Rosenwald schools are still standing that are in decent shape now? About how many?
There are about 60 that are still standing.
Okay.
Not all of those are in decent shape. There was an archaeological report done in 2015 by the Tennessee Division of Archaeology where they went out and they surveyed and they kind of found the schools and found about 60 structures that were in any type of repair. I don't know the final number for how many are in good shape because there's so many that are still going through the process of restoration and everything, but I kind of want to say less than 30 or 40.
I was going to say around 30, probably half of those. Yeah.
Now, do y'all work with MTSU, the Center for Historic Preservation, at all in any of these Rosenwald School projects?
We did.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Hofschwelle actually wrote kind of like the main scholar research on Rosenwald schools, and then Dr. West, who's our state historian, has been working out of the Center for Historic Preservation on Rosenwald schools for years, going out and working with them.
For decades.
Yeah. Setting up exhibits, setting up museums, just helping them with their reconstruction type of projects.
Yeah, and Dr. Hofschwelle is actually going to be our guest speaker for our exhibit in February. So
I love listening to her speak.
yes,
So
she
that'll be
has a
great.
very, very deep history of the Rosenwald schools. Now, if there's a Rosenwald school that maybe is in disrepair, that needs some restoration, how would funding come for that? Is that local donations? Are there grants available? How would they restore a facility like that?
That's a good question. Well, the first thing that I thought of was a good resource that we have on our website at the Tennessee State Museum is videos from the symposium that we did for our permanent or our temporary exhibit, I'm sorry. But in that symposium, we had people from Tennessee Historic, I'm mixing words.
Tennessee Historical Commission.
The Tennessee Historical Commission.
Linda Wynn.
Linda Wynn, yes, exactly. We also had the Division of Archaeology come out. Dr. West and all of those people. And in those sessions, when they did their presentations, they talked a lot about what you could do if you needed to conserve the history of a Rosenwald school. So that would be my first resource to offer.
Yeah, a lot of times when people reach out to us, I usually tell them to let Dr. West know.
Right.
Like, put it on his radar, because you never know, that could be the next Rosenwald school that he focuses on with his, just expertise and his students doing projects. There are different federal level grants that actually focus on Black history sites. So sometimes there's money involved in there. So yeah, there's a few other grants, but I think a lot of it, and I'm sure you've probably seen similar things here in McMinnville, so much comes from the community. It's like the passion and just the excitement of preserving that. So there are some resources out there, but I think the majority of the work is done like at home in the communities.
That's a great point. And when we were traveling and going to different communities, a lot of times these buildings were being maintained by alumni associations of people who went to those schools, but also sometimes people who didn't, like siblings of people who went to those schools and things like that. So it does come from the community a lot of times.
Yeah, and I would imagine it almost has to start from a grassroots effort in the community to do that. And even though the original Bernard School here burned in 1946, they built back and it opened in 49. That building was demolished in 82. And if you talk to a lot of locals, and I'm one of them, the question has always been, how could we let them destroy that school? It was the only sort of remaining, even though the gym is still there now, the gym's there and it's being used by a group called Young Men United. You always wonder, how could that ever happen? And sometimes small town politics can be a problem, and in this case it was. But I also think sometimes in America, period, I don't want to brush all of our country with a broad stroke, but sometimes we tend to tear down and build new more than other countries who preserve.
We do.
Yeah,
We like
yeah.
stuff.
And I'm sure that becomes a problem when you have buildings like old Rosenwald schools and things of that nature. But going back to the concept of Rosenwald schools, was there some trigger point that the museum, the Tennessee State Museum, said, we're going to showcase these? I mean, was there someone that came to y'all? Was there a staff member that said, do we know about this program? Sort of backtracking, but was there some trigger point to say, we're going to do this on the Rosenwald schools?
It was a good mix of all of those things, I think.
All of the above.
At the time where they began talks about this exhibit, we were coming up on the 100th anniversary of a lot of these schools in Tennessee.
Okay.
So it was a hot topic just in Tennessee history in general, I guess you could say. And then we got approached by a man named Andrew Filer, who did a traveling photography exhibit where he exhibited, he created a book where he took photos of a lot of the Rosenwald schools across the South, not just Tennessee. But when he came to Tennessee, we had a Tennessee-focused exhibit using his photography, and we really wanted to supplement that with something that was really specific to Tennessee history. And Annabeth Dooley, who is a graduate of MTSU, she also worked with MTSU CHP very closely with Rosenwald schools, so that's one of the passions that she has, and she really pushed for us to do a community-focused exhibit where we went out to communities and allowed them a platform to tell their own Rosenwald story.
And to add on, you had that question about why not Bernard School. We had to talk about that because, again, out of those 354 schools, where do we focus?
Right.
And it came down to we wanted community focus schools that were open to the community.
That
we
were
didn't
still
want
standing.
that was
Yeah,
still standing.
right. Understand.
Because you never want to do an exhibit where people are like, oh, that's a really cool building, we're going to go check it out, and then it's on somebody's private property, which
Right.
has happened in the past. So
Oh, really?
we were very sensitive to that, and we worked with Dr. West and Dr. Hofschwelle to be like, what are some of the communities that you worked with that might be interested in working with us? And we ended up on the 16, and we were kind of making sure they were across the state in all 3 grand divisions. But yeah, to her point, the photography exhibit was fantastic, and we used it as a jumping off for our year of Rosenwald schools. It was a good introduction. As you said,
Right.
it was kind of the first time you'd heard about Rosenwald schools when you got there, and that was similar. So we used that to kind of let people know what it was, and then we wanted to get into it and give everybody their own story.
Now, you talk about some of the schools were on private property. Was this because maybe the original landowner was a private citizen who just sort of donated that land for the school building? or did they acquire the property later on? Did you find some of both? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
I think every Rosenwald school has a very unique, specific story about one, how it was built, like how the land was acquired. Like, I think that's very unique to each site, as well as its preservation and conservation story and what's going on today. So I don't want to jump too far ahead, but that was one of the reasons why we wanted to do the symposium, because when we were going across the state and talking to all of these different communities, everybody was at different points in the process, but they all had this, tie, this similarity of being Rosenwald schools, even though all their stories were so different. So, yeah, I think each Rosenwald school is so unique.
There were, I guess, actual design plans of schools based on 6 teachers, 7 teachers, things of that nature. Did all the schools follow those plans? Did they have to follow those plans, or could they sort of go off on their own if they wanted to?
For the purpose of the grant, they did have to follow those.
Okay.
There were a few schools, I don't think in Tennessee, but like when we were looking at some of the other schools that went a little bit off script, like they weren't really supposed to have like what's it called, like the cupolas. But there's 1 or 2 that have those where they maybe gave it a little bit more of a church look or something. But the purpose of the architecture was very specific, and it was, they wanted, and by the way, these plans that you're mentioning were free for anybody to use. So you will actually find white schools that look like Rosenwald schools that were not part of the program, but might still be called Rosenwald schools because of the design. Because they were at the top of just architectural, what's the word I want?
Modern.
Yeah,
It was
just
the most modern building.
The way the windows were done, you got more light in. They also had ventilation that was better for the health of the students, so it helped with the eyes, their lungs. They wanted like those folding doors to separate the spaces because so many of the schools were open.
Right.
So if you had like 2 classrooms, they're overlapping each other, so that was very specific. They wanted the stage in there. You had mentioned the gymnasium, which probably has the stage at the Bernard School, but they wanted it to be a community space and not just for the school. They had a bathroom had to be part of it, a coat closet, a separate kitchen. So all of those things were just very, very specific. So to be part of the grant, you did need to follow those rules for the most part, even the color of the paint, because because of some of the problems that existed, during that time, they didn't want to call a lot of attention. They didn't want maybe any groups to be jealous or get just a little bit too involved there. So that beige and that white paint that you see on like everything was also in kind of the plans that they put out to everybody.
Yeah. And just to go off that really quickly, we call them Rosenwald schools, but a lot of this design, it comes from Tuskegee.
Yeah. Oh,
it's
really?
from the administrators, Robert E. Clay specifically. He develops these plans. So they do this at a time where, of course, like we said before, things are separate, but they're not equal. So a lot of rural, especially Black children, are going to school in churches, in barns, like wherever they can go. So these schools were really designed so that they would have state-of-the-art modern buildings to learn in.
And if I remember correctly, I think they had to point north, was it?
Yes.
North,
Well, I don't know if it was.
Was it north?
Was it north?
Well, it had to do.
Some with the
Actually,
rising
yeah,
sun.
The way the sun had to rise had to like go specifically over like one show.
They had to be risen off the ground to prevent flooding or mold or
very
anything like
specific,
that.
yeah.
So yeah, there were so many details in there that were all very specific.
Were the original building, were they heated at all? Were there like fireplaces or
So they had
radiators?
stoves in them.
so
A
the
lot of
stoves.
them had
Okay.
the stoves in them
Okay.
that you had to feed with coal or wood.
We heard from many alumni where their job was to actually, feed the coal and
As
and
children,
stuff like that.
I remember that well at the old Bernard School. The newer version had a coal-fired furnace and radiators that would ping during the day, when they get hot and all. And that we'd go down there and stoke the furnace with coal and things of that nature. So yeah, I remember that even back then. Did anything come other? I guess where I'm going with this is, you got a building, new school. What about books and things of that? Was that part of the program too, or was it just the building?
Not the original Rosenwald school program, but it's a good point because you got the schools, you've got the kids starting to go. A lot of the times because you had the buy-in from, the government, the county governments and everything, they were getting schools. They were usually the hand-me-down
Well, that's
books
where I
from
was
like the
at. Why I
White
asked
Mills.
that, yeah.
But eventually it became a need, and part of the Rosenwald Fund also went to building up libraries in the schools. So that
Okay.
became a later project and focus of the Rosenwald
And
Fund.
also radios. There was also
Yep.
a program to grant so they can maybe something like this.
Like I read it.
The
Like a
radio.
prop, huh? Okay.
But the Rosenwald program, well, Julius Rosenwald and his philanthropic endeavors become like way more than just Rosenwald building. So he has like an entire organization. And Fisk University actually has the papers from his I'm like losing words right now. Julius Rosenwald
like
Fund?
organization, yeah, like the fund organization papers. They used to keep, well, they still keep the cards on all of the schools. They're currently going through a grant project where they're digitizing everything. So
Right,
it's
right.
not online right now, but it'll be back up, and they just have a wealth of information and a wonderful library staff to help anybody that's doing research.
Okay, okay. Sort of concentrated on the Tennessee State Museum, bringing to light the Rosenwald School program. Is there any plans to try to maybe bring this a national focus to maybe the museum in D.C., the African American, I'm trying to think of the whole name of the new museum. Is there any plans to try to bring this to a national level? Even though I know this was primarily in the South, but I mean, is there any ideas of maybe doing that to bring it to more people throughout the whole country?
So I will say, just speaking for us, probably not, because we're probably not the best avenue for that. What we failed to kind of mention, you touched on a little bit, we partnered with Fisk University
Right.
all the way through this, and I know that they have worked on bigger projects. What is the Smithsonian group came out while we were in the middle of this project and was actually working with different families to digitize their photos and all that kind of thing. So I think through higher programs, they're bringing the national story out there. And then there's also the National Park Service is working on creating the first national park devoted to a Jewish American for Julius Rosenwald. And they are planning on focusing one Rosenwald school in each of the 15 states to be kind of like a national park site. And I think that will help bring the story out. But again, kind of a little bit higher than us.
Yeah, I just think that would be nice to sort of know, because it seems like education is always in the forefront in our nation. There's, I know there's a big issue with the current legislature on the vouchers and things of that nature. So I just think it would be something to, even though we can't go back to the past, it would be something to know about. And I think it'd be perfect at the museum. I've been to the museum in Washington, D.C., and it's amazing.
Yeah.
But this would be a good story to tell there, I think. I think it would be a
I
very
agree,
good
too.
story.
I agree.
to
And I
tell.
will say at the NEH Fund, I spoke with people from there. You're asking about grants. They have specific grants set up for Rosenwald School things as well. So they've been kind of working on it, I think, for a few decades. But again, it hasn't.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of anything really, to be honest,
Okay.
nationally going on for Rosenwald schools, but like through conferences and things, I've met people as far as like the Carolinas who are doing work on their Rosenwald schools. So I think it's something that might just be specific to the South, and maybe that makes it a little difficult to give it like a national presence because
Yeah, I
like
can
people outside of the
understand that.
South maybe can't relate.
Yeah.
But I think it would be, like you said, very timely because education is always at the forefront of what we're discussing publicly.
And I think just the history of Julius Rosenwald and his relationship with Booker T. Washington, and of course we know the history of Booker T. Washington. I mean, that's sort of a global thing. I mean,
Right.
Rosenwald wasn't from the South; he was, from the North, the Chicago area. So I think it would be good. You had the temporary exhibit at the museum. Why the traveling exhibit? What was the thought process behind that?
This is literally probably one of my favorite things. It's because everybody was asking for it.
Okay.
It didn't start out as part of the plan, but when it went up, and again, having it at the State Museum is fantastic. It's Nashville. You're almost in the middle of the dead middle of the state,
Right.
you had so many people that couldn't travel from East Tennessee or West Tennessee, and we just had so many requests to be like, is there a way to get more information? Are you going to be traveling anything? Like, what can we do? What can we hear about it? Which is cool. You know, when you do an exhibit and you get that much of a response, Tranae and I really kind of got onto it, and it was a really busy time, you know, so it was just kind of like, you know, can we rework this? And the other part of it was that we wanted it to be able to go everywhere. Mm-hmm. So for example, when it comes, I know you're going to talk about it later, but when it comes to McMinnville, it'll be in a library. So we wanted to make sure that whatever institution wanted the exhibit, it could go there. It can go into a library, it can go into, we've had one in a senior center, we've got one going into a city mayor's, you know, office area. Oh, really? In Wilson County. So we didn't want to do artifacts because we didn't want anybody turned down because their humidity wasn't good or their security wasn't quite tight enough or anything like that. So that was, a lot of people are like, why aren't there any artifacts with this one? And that's the main reason. We want it to go anywhere that's interested, and then we encourage groups to, you know, add on to the story from their own local Rosenwald. We even kind of created templates if they wanted to match the look of the traveling exhibit. It was in Hohenwald a couple months ago. She sent me a bunch of photographs, which I scanned in and kind of put together on a slideshow so they could have one specifically from their school playing while it was up in their senior center. So we're trying to work with every individual site so that it just kind of fits their purposes the best.
And about how many sites are going to host the exhibit?
So we started in August, and we actually had such a response. The first day that we announced it, I got so many emails just from like a Facebook post. Mm-hmm. So that actually kind of gave us a little bit of leverage to get 2 copies of the traveling exhibit. So we have 6 that traveled around from August to December, and then right now we're completely booked out through the end of October, going to another 11 sites. But we'll be opening up that registration period again and try to build it out, because I will keep, you know, taking it around as long as people are asking for it.
So the traveling exhibit could go on for a number of years, you're hoping?
Yeah, we tried when we reworked the material. We wanted it to, I want to say like timely, but not timely. Like we wanted it so that if it's 5 years from now, you know, it's not dated. It's still, right. We kind of stuck to the basic information so that if it's still going. Sometimes like we, you know, with other exhibits like the women's suffrage, we were focused on that anniversary date, and we didn't want to do anything like that. We wanted it to travel for as long as possible.
Cod and I sort of jumped on the invitation earlier about requesting to host the exhibit here in McMinnville, and requested February, which I'm taking a chance with the weather, of course, in February, but I just thought it would be so appropriate during Black History Month that we could bring that here and just incorporate that into all the things we're doing here for Black History Month, and y'all come and set it up, and I mean it's not a lot of labor intensive for the host sites.
No, yeah, usually one person can set it up in about 30 minutes. You know, it's another part of what we did is we kind of went with a different type of vendor for setup. If anybody's ever seen a museum exhibit, they often are kind of like a thick material. They're called banner ups. That's right. What you see in a lot of those temporary spaces. These look similar, but it's actually, the material is almost like a thick t-shirt material. So if you're in a space with a lot of kids and they run into it, they're just going to bounce off. It's not going to rip the material or anything. It can actually be thrown into a washing machine if somebody were to spill something on it. Again, when you talked about some of those details that went through it, this is where we spent a lot of time with this one. And so they go up very easily, and they're also easily moved. Like they've got a heavy base, but one person can usually move it around. And we even set it up so we don't care what order the panels are in. We have an idea of what we think works best, but every single site has done it a little bit different based on what they think is important or what they want to highlight in a certain area.
Mm-hmm. And we wanted it to be customizable, so we even had conversations about, okay, well, if you can see this front part of it, is it necessary to see the back? Like, do we want these 2 panels to have information that are beside each other, or one on the front? Because we wanted it to be like, okay, I don't want to use this panel. You can throw this in the bag, you know. So that was a big conversation that we had as we were reworking the content, was making it so that people can really make it personal to the site that it is visiting at that moment. Yeah.
And you know, and we'll sort of bring it down to our display that we're going to have in February. we sort of did the same thing. You know, I went up to the library, and the reason, I just want people to understand, the reason we're not hosting it at the museum is just the museum, the schematic is just not relevant to hosting something of this nature. And we're hoping to get maybe a little bit more turnout being at the museum, at the library, and give us more room. We're going to be in the upstairs auditorium, the largest room at the library. But we went and did the same thing. We went up and we looked at the panels. Remember, I asked you for the dimensions, and at first I thought they were just one-sided, and I found out they're double-sided because we had come up with an idea of a design, and I had to call the folks at the library back, say, I'll be back down because they're two-sided now. Then I thought they were one-sided. So we went back down and we looked at placement, how we could place them, because, and let me put a quick plug in for Humanities Tennessee. They did provide us a grant, so there's going to be 2 panels that's Bernard specific in addition to this auditorium setup that we're going to have. But we also looked at, well, if someone comes in a wheelchair, we want them to be able to maneuver through all the panels in, say, a wheelchair for ADA compliance and things of that nature. So we spent quite a bit of time just looking around that empty room saying what would be the best place to put the panels so that everybody can get the best experience and move around. And we didn't know if there was a time frame of you need to put this one first or this one. So that's good to know that it's really not a sort of a time frame that you've got to start here and go through.
Like I said, whenever I've gone, I've kind of, to me, the first panel and the last panel, I usually tell people this is kind of our front one because we have kind of like a title panel. I was like, and then the last one, is kind of, it actually took place during the Rosenwald Symposium that Tranae mentioned earlier, which was also helped funded by Humanities Tennessee grant. So they're helping everybody do wonderful things around the state.
All the time.
But that was kind of one of our closing programs with that temporary exhibit at the State Museum where we got to bring in the alumni. So we have that in idea, but it's not going to mess up any flow if you don't do it how we think about it, because we just didn't want you to have to go in order.
It's not rigid at all.
Good. The concept we have for our exhibit is, as I say, there's a lady who works with Warren Art, Sherry Denning. I'm going to give you a shout out, Sherry. She's designing a miniature version of the Bernard Auditorium with the curtains and the whole 9 yards, and we're going to have a TV monitor there that's going to run through some oral histories and a couple of documentaries I did on Bernard School. And people will be able actually to sit in front of the stage of the auditorium and watch these videos.
I love that.
And in addition to walking through the panels and seeing a specific panel on Bernard, that's part of the program. I mentioned Dr. Hashwali being the guest speaker. She's going to be talking about the global aspect, also like what y'all talked about the Rosenwald program. And then there's another gentleman by the name of Antoine Vaughn, a younger guy. He's going to talk about the Bernard School experience and history. His grandfather actually was a student at the old original Bernard School. So he's going to talk about the history of the Bernard School. We hope to have 2 or 3 of actual students who went to that school. As I mentioned, most of those people now are either in their late 80s or 90s. So there's only a couple that are physically able to come out, but we're going to hopefully have those folks there with us just to recognize them. And we're going to go through a roll call of the living students who are still living. That's all part of the program that we're going to put on, and hopefully people will enjoy it. I guess this is my plug for everybody to come out. You can see the passion they have for it. We have the same passion for it locally. And please come out and look at the museum, view the museum. It will be open during the normal public library hours. So go to their site, see what their hours are, and you can just come in and go upstairs and just walk through. And by all means, if you have time on your schedule on the 1st of February, that's a Saturday, starting at noon, 12 p.m., we're going to have this sort of opening ceremony with the people I just mentioned, just sort of kick things off. There will be some refreshments there too, so you can get fed while you're there. But we're really looking forward to having the traveling exhibit here, and we're hoping that people are going to come out and support it, and hopefully y'all be able to come down and be part of the audience on the 1st of February.
Yes, sir.
But and if you can't, like I said, it's going to be there all month, as you know. You can come down some other time and just see what we ended up for the full display. Any great things in the future for the State Museum? I'm going to put a plug in for them too. Anything y'all got working on now that you're really excited about?
Yes, so this year I am leading a photography exhibit. So we are doing a photography exhibit on the first 100 years of photography in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
It's going to cover it's going to be based mostly around the early Tennessee studios across the state, but it's going to cover multiple topics like race and photography, also just capturing history, all of the historic events that happened in those first 100 years of photography. So it's going to be a lot of
If
information.
I'm not mistaken, I think one of the McMinnville studios, there's some photographs
Yes,
from there, right?
yes,
Yeah.
there is.
Right down the street.
I was
from
going
the museum.
I said, well, I'll wait till
Southern
we're
School
off
of
camera.
Photography, yes,
But I was
Southern
going
School.
to suggest yes, there is a local photography
Yes.
studio that donated their archives to the library. And
Yes.
I mean, back in the days of the old plates when they made
Yeah.
photography and stuff. So it looks like y'all have already touched base.
Yeah.
Yeah,
with
we
that
have
studio. Okay.
actually great
Yeah,
artifacts
they,
from Southern
they
School. We have
donated a
some
couple things for
cameras.
it, yeah.
We have some glass plate negatives, so you have
Okay.
to come out to
All
the
right.
Tennessee State Museum to see them.
Interesting you say it, 'cause one of the shows that I'm getting together now is the director of the library and the lady who's in charge of all those photographs. There's some photographs in that archives that we don't know if these people are from McMinnville or not. You know, even though the studio was here, people came from all around because they were so well known as photographers. And we're going to do a program I'm sort of tentatively calling Do You Know Me? And just put some of those pictures on
That's
and just
cool.
I
ask
love
people,
that.
does any of these people, I mean, there's some high school guys in like high school sweater that doesn't look like they're from Bernard, you know, so we're trying to figure out maybe who these people are, and just some beautiful photographs of people that we just would like to maybe know who these people are.
Absolutely.
You know, if they're not even from McMinnville, just who they are. So we're going to do a show on Who Am I? So
love
maybe some
that.
people can help us determine who these people are.
That's wonderful.
Good.
That is awesome.
Hey, we've got similar ideas. I like
Yeah, we
that.
have to collaborate. I was
Like
just
that.
saying that. We need to talk off camera.
I like that. Like that. Hey, I want to thank y'all for coming on the program today. And once again, I can't say enough how much we appreciate all the work y'all have helped us with getting our museum up and running. And I know you have a lot of museum in the States. You'll have to sort of spread yourself thin and still do your jobs. But really, thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
All right.
having
And
us.
you got an open invitation anytime you want to come back.
All right.
We'll see what the next program is. We'll bring you. Well, the photography one. We may need to bring you back.
Okay.
And there
All
might
right.
even be a traveling component of that.
Oh,
It'll
that
come
too?
along later,
Okay.
but we'll definitely let you know if
And
it
if
starts
we could
traveling.
get some local, and oh man,
Yes, that'd be great.
yeah, I need to come work for you.
Yeah, well, coming up with Debbie, I know with field services is still like a new program, but I think that's something that you want to do right with traveling exhibits
Okay.
more.
Yeah, I want to start because, as you know, a lot of the museums here in Tennessee are run by volunteers or
Right,
people that maybe
sure.
didn't go to school for it, but they're crash course learning as they do it and doing an amazing job. But a lot of times, just you get the museum set up, like at Black History Museum, you might not have a lot of space for a new museum or
Right.
might not have staff to focus on that. I want to get more traveling exhibits going around the state so that it's an opportunity to bring in more visitors and to showcase things. So like if you have a photography exhibit, there could be people in McMinnville that might not be familiar of that photography studio. So it's just that same opportunity to highlight what's going on all over the state and not just what people can get to Nashville to see.
Right.
Good. I think that's a very noble thing because, like you say, everyone can't get to Nashville. To bring it to the people, yeah, that just makes sense. So
Yeah.
glad y'all doing that. Thanks again.
Thank
for
you.
coming in. And like I say, you have an open invitation. Anytime you want to come back, let me know.
All right.
right.
Thanks so much.
And thank you for joining us today. Please join us for the next edition. Until then, this is Mickey Gwynn. Make today and every day a great day.